Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I am very,
You're
very
very welcome.
excited to dive into probably a few exciting topics with my guest today. I'm very excited to be joined by Kathryn Creedy, and we'll get into your background a little bit more as we dive into the show. But thanks so much for joining me, Kathryn. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome. Well, I know that you've spent more than 15 years covering aviation workforce issues and really diving into some of the topics that we're seeing as critical now. You've been getting into them before people were really paying attention. So, what prompted your interest in this space and what has kept you interested throughout all that time?
Well, I've been an aviation journalist for 40 years, and this was even a concern in the 90s when I was covering the regional airline industry for a newsletter I created. And just felt we're constantly talking about workforce, 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 and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. And I've observed over the years that the workforce initiatives by the federal government and the workforce initiatives by industry, most of which were volunteer, really had not delivered the workforce. But I also
Mm,
observed how all of these little groups all around the country are actually delivering the workforce. And that is the Women in Aviation International chapters. That is the Organization for Black Aerospace Professionals, Latino professionals in aerospace, National Gay Pilots Association. All of these people, there's lots of nonprofit STEM organizations that are using aviation and aerospace as the STEM curriculum. So I just decided that I know nobody was really covering it the way it should be covered. So I began with Future Aviation Aerospace Workforce News at the beginning of the pandemic when all my editors went away. And I just decided, let's learn what's going on out there. Let's find out how to organize it, whether it needs to be organized, and how we can make it more efficient for search and the promotion of our aviation careers.
mm. I love that. I think that organizing factor is so critical. And I think it's easy to sit back and say, somebody should be doing something about this.
Mhm.
But to be the person that actually goes out to do something about it takes a lot of effort. So
It's
well
not
done
just
for
me,
taking that
it's
on.
people all over the industry, personal individuals who are saying, "I wanna give back to my industry. I wanna promote aviation and aerospace careers." So there's a ton of programs out there
Mm,
that nobody knows about it. There's a ton of programs with NASA and FAA nobody knows about. So it's kind of connecting the dots between the people who we are trying to aspire to our careers, the resources that are available, many of which are free, and their next steps, and to guide them from early learning when they first begin exploring careers all the way to their careers.
mm. That's interesting. We've seen that a lot working in the veteran space. People call it the sea of goodwill, that
Mhm.
sometimes there's so many good options and opportunities. And there's lots of people that are out there that want to do something to help, but figuring out, again, how to connect all those dots and who is the person or which organization is the one that you really need to be connected with for your particular situation that can make an actual impact for you is, I think, the hardest part. So I'm glad to hear that, there's that collaboration going on. One thing that you and I spoke about in preparing for this that I thought was very interesting was how this college for all mentality has been baked into the American education system for a long time. I really recognized it in my own generation as a millennial. I mean, nearly all of my friends are saddled with tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. And I saw a very strong push away from any sort of alternative education.
Right.
Um, and there is has been and still is a real stigma around that. I think that's starting to change dramatically, and I think it needs to, but it's slow in the seeping all the way down into society, right? That actual cultural change and
Yeah.
rebranding. And when we were talking, something you said that was really interesting is that, this is not a more recent phenomenon. This has actually been going on since the 60s. So
Yes.
and it sounded like something you'd really looked into. So I'd love to hear
Mhm.
your perspective on how that mentality that everybody needs to go to college, there's kind of one path that's the premier path. And
Mhm.
how did that actually shape the workforce challenges that we're dealing with today, especially in aviation? I know I had Megan DeHart from Aviation Institute of Maintenance on a couple months ago, and she was saying there's 4 people leaving aviation for every 1 person coming in, and I've heard that reflected across a number of trades. So we've
Yeah.
got a pipeline issue. How do you think that that mentality really impacted the pipeline challenges we're seeing today?
Well, first of all, trades were stigmatized. And I'm talking about building trades, I'm talking about maintenance trades, I'm talking about all the trades that were stalwarts in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And in the 50s and 60s, we went college for all. That's the only path to success. And yeah, you get paid more. If you have a degree or a master's, you get paid even more, PhD paid even more. My definition of success is different. My
Mhm.
of success is, do you have a good job? And with that job, can you enter the middle class? And we've had not only a shift in education towards college for all, which college is not for all, but we've also had this shift away from using your hands in your work. And we're talking the building careers, plumbing, HVAC, carpentry, landscaping, whatever, but also in our trades, aviation maintenance, flight dispatch, piloting really is a trade. So we needed to change the conversation that we were having. So that's what happened to the pipeline. The pipeline evaporated because many things. One, manufacturing went overseas, which it really didn't. A lot of it did, but it didn't. We're still
Mhm.
manufacturing a lot here, and we have a critical workforce shortage in manufacturing. So we've been trying to address this workforce for my entire career and discussing why all the efforts failed. Those who worked on promoting our careers said it was because it was all volunteer work, as I said. Um, we have wanted someone else to solve our problems. That's the biggest problem, and policy groups have largely targeted Congress and the federal government for a solution. That means we have not done anything to help ourselves, and all of that has dramatically changed in the last decade.
Mm.
First of all, in the last decade, and I would say from 2016 on, we've seen more and more stories about kids wanting to go into the trades. And I've already mentioned the skills that you need in the different trades. When I went to the American School Counselors Association, all the trades were there, including architecture, dentistry. I'm not so sure we would consider them trades because those are college degrees. Medical, they were
Yeah.
there and they were trying to convince the guidance counselors to steer a path toward their professions. And we were also there, but we weren't at the 35,000-foot level that we needed to be at as
Mm.
others are. And what really blew me away at the conference was the unions for the trades. We're talking carpenters and electricians, etc. They're paying for the education. They're paying for training.
Mhm.
And our unions are completely different because they want a very tight pipeline so that they can increase the pay for individuals. So that's made and really it's a race to the bottom line as the unions try to restrict access to our careers, and it's really a shame. But um today, not only have parents and students and second career people and people hit by the AI changes are all looking at different things. And if
Mhm.
you look at the skilled trades, those are pretty bulletproof. No matter what, you've gotta get your air conditioning fixed in the summertime. No matter what, you've gotta get your toilet fixed in the summertime. But no matter what, we have to get our aircraft fixed. We have to get our manufacturing lines fixed. We have to get our
Yes.
manufacturing lines, populated. So, all of these different trades have now risen in importance as people have looked for strategies on ways to hire and maybe even go to college on somebody else's dime. Now, I have 2 millennials. They're both saddled with college debt, and, I just last year finished paying off their college my portion of their college debt, so it's cross-generational, this fear
Mm,
that we have of taking on college debt. And this is another thing that's changed that has to change. We have relied on every individual to school themselves up, whether it's college or certification or whatever it is. We say, if you want this, you're going to have to go out and buy it. And that has, and other countries do not do that. They pay for training, they pay for reskilling and upskilling, et cetera. So
right.
we are behind the
Apprenticeships.
power curve on that. And so we need to change that as well. And employers need to understand that it takes $100,000 to replace a single employee. What would that could that investment be used for in reskilling and upskilling and retaining that employee rather than finding some newbie that just got out of whatever but it's the certifications my and when I talk to parents and students, I'm always advocating for get certificated out of high school, go into the
Yes.
workforce, leverage your employer education benefits for additional certifications or college education, and then you'll enter the middle class, and you'll keep up with the pay of college graduates because the workforce shortages are so acute. For
Mhm.
instance, an aviation maintenance technician will start out of high school at $65,000 a year.
Great.
My first job was $6,000 a year, which dates me, but still. Um, and within 5 years, they're making $125,000, and
That's amazing.
um, that's a solid middle class experience. Oh, and
Mhm.
there's more. You gain more as you gain experience. So we need to change um, that these are low pay, low intelligence occupations because each one of these occupations has technology that was not even conceived in the 40s.
Well, not only the technology that people are working with, but the technology in the things they're working on. Because in manufacturing, you've got robotics, you've got huge amounts of automation in aviation, in trucking. I know I've talked to guys that went from the military. Some of their equipment is a little more dated, some of it's a little ahead of the civilian side, kind of depends on what side you're on. But I know one guy was saying, some of the trucks and things that they had worked on maybe had a handful of sensors, and then he came to work on the civilian side, and every single thing on the vehicle had a sensor. And that was a big change, a big difference. In some ways, it made it a lot easier to diagnose things because you could,
Mhm.
run the thing and it would tell you, oh, this sensor's pinging right here, and you could diagnose much more quickly. There were, it made his job a lot easier, but it was also a whole different system to learn, which he did easily. That's a nice thing with veterans. They're used to learning quickly and getting up to speed quickly. But I think that is a big misconception, is that jobs that you do a little more hands-on are going to be non-technical or not involved
Right.
with tech. And, I've worked with quite a few folks in the transportation industry, like just take diesel technicians, for instance.
Mhm.
We're getting ready to
Perfect
have
example.
driverless cars, have electric
Mhm.
trucks. Some of these hiring managers are saying, hey, in the next few years, we're going to have electrical specialists that only work on these electric systems, that only work on these autonomous systems, that only work on the sensors, that don't ever get grease on their hands, that are working on computers and like, circuit boards and stuff. So these are very technical jobs that are changing really rapidly. So I think that's very interesting.
Year
And go ahead.
years ago, I met with a guidance counselor, and I said, "Have you ever thought about guiding kids into aviation maintenance?" And she said, "Oh, I don't think I could." convince my parents to have their kid become a grease monkey. And I thought, if you could ever saw an aircraft hangar, you could eat off the floor. And that's by design because it's a safety issue. You mentioned, and that's another thing that has changed radically in the last 2 decades. And that is employers are looking for super employees, one who doesn't just work on that one little itty bitty component, but one who can communicate across a vast number of disciplines and understand across a vast number of disciplines how each other's works and how we can help each other in problem solving. So this whole idea of specialist is kind of moving aside in favor of these super employees.
Hmm,
So I think that
that's interesting.
that's another way it's changed. And I think people of my generation would not recognize the changes that have been happening in just the last 15 years on workforce, covering it. And it's just astonishing to me. And when I talk to people about the trends that I've found, they're totally unaware of it. And we need to get on the same page in order to boost our careers.
I think your point about guidance counselors is really interesting because I've talked to a couple of people recently whose kids are, in public school and high school, and they're trying to tell their kids, hey, there's options for you. Have you looked at the military? Have you looked at the merchant marines? Have you looked at the trades? Have you looked at getting your CDL? Have you looked at, I mean, in our area, some of the areas around us, it's always hit or miss with school systems, but some of them are really incredible and have some really phenomenal like career programs built in where you can become like a licensed hairstylist while you're in high school, which is like a $20,000 school to go to after high school. You can get that license in high school. You just have to do an apprenticeship, while you're in high school. You can get certain mechanics licenses. Like there's certain things you can do where you're actually, like you said, leaving high school with the credentials. But the parents were so frustrated because they said, they would try to give these options to their kids, and then they would go to school and every coach, every teacher, every counselor is like telling the kids, every single one of you has to go to college. And it's like their incentives need to be rewired in some way to say, hey,
Right.
this needs to be more individualized. Like, and I think there is, I'm sure somewhere in the system there's baked in some level of funding that the schools are getting based on how many of their students go on to college. But it's like maybe we should be looking at how many of these students go on to successful careers.
Thank you.
And we should be doing that for every type of school, in my opinion. You and I spoke about this before too. I think
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
incentives around education are wrong if we're not saying, hey, does this lead to a successful career? And that's one thing I know we wanted to get into. If you do have, whether it's parents, if it's transitioning veterans, other career transitioners, looking at some of these options, how would you recommend that they go about looking at, examining, vetting some of these trade school or certificate programs to make sure they're actually going to get the the career out of it that they're going for and not just use money or use GI Bill benefits on something that's not really going to benefit them? Do you have
Well,
suggestions for that?
yeah, many. You've touched on a couple of things that are additional trends. There is an estate in this union that has not identified aviation and aerospace as key economic drivers and has completely shifted its education focus to delivering the workforce, paying for training programs. On the Florida Atlantic coast, we identified four: advanced manufacturing, aerospace, aviation, and cybersecurity. And we have, obviously, on the Space Coast, we have lots of tech. So there's an aerospace and defense training facility, 2 weeks and you're on the job. And so people have to look at these programs and the things that, when I talk to people about how do you choose, I want to know who's in that that education's milieu, who's in their ecosystem. Are they closely related to industry, or is it just retirees teaching newbies?
Mm,
Do they have opportunities? I mean, strong opportunities for internships and apprenticeships. Do they have relationships with industry that they can create these programs for their kids? or the second career person. If they don't have those types of things, an entire ecosystem around the educational experience, then they should move on because they're just a diploma mill, as we would call it in the 80s and 90s. What I'm looking for is who's teaching. Great. We're having the retired mechanics teach. That's wonderful. Or retired flight dispatchers or retired whoever. But I want to know that they can take the kids back to their old job and introduce them to the maintenance floor. I want to know that they have a pipeline right into the recruiting staff at the airline or the MRO or whomever. So that's another way aviation has changed. I mean, education has changed. It's no longer the ability to teach you something. It is the ability to leverage your professors or your teachers' contacts in order to get a
Mm,
job. What is their
great point.
placement rate? We've seen so many kids come out of high school and come out of college in the last 3 years not being able to find a job in their field. That's about 25% over the last 3 years, and they're not working in their field. And so, like, why did I pay all this for my education? And I'll tell you, as a parent, when I was looking at colleges, I thought, okay, I'm not paying for an education; I'm paying for a resort.
Mhm.
So I that really made me mad. Excuse me.
No, it's all right. Well, and I think you're like,
So
to your point about
so,
using the professor or teachers networks, a lot of times, I mean, I think the primary benefit that anybody gets out of college is the network. And so whether that's with fellow students or with your teachers or professors, that is what you're taking away from college, primarily at this point.
and if I had to advise yes, if I had to advise one thing is networking. People don't understand the power of networking. Networking is how you get a job. You do not get a job applying online. So, what I tell students is, and I have met amazing number of students. Join your local professional organization, whether it's the National Business Aviation Association. For me, it was the Central Business Aviation Association, Central Florida Business Aviation Association. We had happy hours, and I met several students who drove all the way down from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University to Melbourne, which is an hour and a half, and to network at the Central Florida Business Aviation Association. And
Smart.
were there were there events up in Daytona? You betcha. Or in Orlando? You betcha. But they really made it a point that networking was the way they were going to get ahead. So they came, they introduced themselves. We, the veterans, said, "Well, what are you looking for?" We wanted to get to know them. What are your ambitions? What are you studying? Etc. And me, I automatically adopt whoever I meet and say, what are your ambitions and how can I help? One young woman I met over and over again at different events, Women in Aviation, Aviation for Women, and Association for Women in Aviation Maintenance. And I've written so many recommendations for scholarships, and people are worried about how to pay for all this stuff. Well, there's a ton of money out there, but nobody really thinks in terms of scholarships because they think, oh, it's too hard. You got to know somebody, et cetera. Well, not if you're already networking at your business aviation association or your experimental aircraft association club or whatever other your women in aviation chapter. This is all part of the ecosystems to get you ahead. And we need to teach kids how to network because right now they don't know how to do face to face. And we need to
Mm,
teach them that that's as important as any skill they will ever learn. So, and again, this is how education has changed over the years. The other thing I would advise is I told you we identified employers on the Space Coast who needed employees who had workforce challenges. So I would start with your local government career organization. Here it's Career Source. It'll be called something else, Employment Florida or whatever. what are the top, and go in with questions, not just help me find a job, but what are the top needs for employers in my county?
Mm,
What credentials do you need in order to get employed? Who provides the training? And is there any subsidized training? How long does it take to train and how much does it cost? We have, as I told you, the Aerospace and Defense Training Center, and some of that is subsidized, but it could be as little as 2 weeks and you're on the job earning a salary and you're making your first step up that ladder. And then you can kind of reconnoiter the job and say, "Oh, I'm gonna need that. So, yeah, I'm gonna go back to Aerospace and Defense Training Center and get that credential,"
mm,
or whatever. So it's
right.
really
Or your
strategic.
your employer might send you there. To
Yeah,
your point from
exactly.
earlier,
The
a lot
employer's
of
already there.
employers yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of employers, if they see that you're working hard and you're a high performer and you say, "Hey, I'm really interested in learning that. How could
Mhm.
I be set up to move into that career path or that type of role?" A lot of times they'll help you get there.
Yeah, and here's another example. Piper Aircraft down in Vero Beach needed a workforce for its manufacturing. It's one of the most popular flight training aircraft, and personal aircraft. So they worked with their career source people in Indian River County, and they created their own training program. So that's another question to ask. Have Who's training? Who's doing training, and what's the training for? These are high value, high quality, need them forever jobs. So that's a strategy. It's not just, here's my resume. What have you got for me? It is, okay, who's hiring and how do I get the training?
That's a great way to think about it. Let's talk specifically about some of the aviation careers that are available. I know you sent me brochure from Women in Aviation. There's a conference coming up for that. For anybody that's interested, can check that out. But I'll be sure to share a link to that. But just from the top of your head, we were chatting about this the other day. I think that for most people on the outside of aviation, like myself, if you asked me 9 months ago before I'd had all these conversations, what are jobs you could have in aviation? I would have probably said a pilot, a flight attendant, and the guy that waves the things for the airplane, going down the runway. I'm sure
He's
there's a
called a marshal.
yes, exactly. I'm like, I know there's an official name. But for people who are saying, okay, Kathryn, you caught my interest. Aviation's important. I like travel. I like airplanes. Maybe this is an area I'd want to work in. What are some of the things that are actually available beyond pilots and flight attendants that people should consider?
Well, when I'm talking to kids, I try to relate them. Turn the question around. What are you interested in?
Hmm.
If they tell me I want to be a vet when I grow up, I go, great, there's a place for you in aviation. Every airline has an animal wrangler who sees to the safe transportation of everything from Fido up to billion-dollar quarter horses. Every gateway airport has a Noah's Ark where animals in transit stay while they're in quarantine. So, are you interested in interior design? Some of the most interesting or innovative designs are inside aircraft. So,
And
that's for
airports.
commercial aviation. And interested in flight operations, interested in medicine, you could be an aeromedical examiner. So I try to interested in gaming. This is one of my favorites because we got a game for you. It's called Flight Simulator, and we need designers and we need technicians. So all of those things, we need to turn the question around and say, what are you interested in? And then relate it to any career out there. There isn't an activity, an interest, or a passion that doesn't have a career related to aviation and aerospace.
Mm,
And one of the things people want most, especially millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, they want a mission. So
hmm
we need to describe the mission that what they're going to be doing is working on colonizing moon. What they're going to be doing is we still don't know enough about aerodynamics to solve a carbon emissions problem. So we're still working on basic aerodynamics to make more efficient aircraft. We're still working on innovative power plants in order to make more efficient aircraft. So saving the planet, I mean, that's a mission. And so if we can also relate this to a mission style dedication, then you've got the next generation hooked because that's what they want. And they also want work life balance, which the employers are going to have to adjust to. There's a lot of adjusting for employers, and I don't think that they know that they have to do that. But you know, it's what is millennials onward are changing the workplace. Thank
Mm.
goodness. It'll be much healthier than what I had when I was first entering the industry.
Wanted to ask you something specifically about that. Are you seeing a different generations approach aviation jobs in different ways? Like, is Gen Z taking a different approach than millennials or Gen X? Or do you feel like you were saying there's sort of a turning of the tide that's happening across multiple generations? What have you seen with that?
It is a true turning of the tide. And while
Mm,
um employers are kicking and screaming trying to say, "No, no, no, we don't wanna change our workplace because it's worked for us for millennia." It has not worked for the employee, and the millennial generation basically said, "Nope, that's not gonna work for me." And as I said, I have 2 millennials, and when I listen to them on the phone with their bosses, it's kind of like, "Wow, I would never in my entire life think about saying that to my boss." Because when I first started, it was sit down and shut up, you're lucky to have a job. You're a woman, you're lucky to have a job. So now this work-life balance is extremely important. Remote work is extremely important, and employers are going to have to change whether they like it or not,
mm.
because this is the future workforce. They can't rely on the boomers or the the Gen X's, etcetera, to set the standard for how we're gonna be on the job. And with diversity, we are no there's not enough white men to go around. I'll just put it straight out like that. Our traditional workforce is white males, and we no longer have enough white men to go around. So we have to go into non-traditional target audiences to say, "We need you." It's not that we
Mm.
want you. We do want them, but we need you. You are critical to our success for many reasons. Study after study shows this. So, plus the fact, we got to populate our workforce. We will never, ever, ever achieve the predictions for growth in airlines, in aviation, in aerospace, if we do not change the way we are change the workplace and change our workplace policies.
A lot of entry level white collar jobs are also disappearing as we're going through this kind of turning of the tides and kind of reevaluation of the trades. And something I think is often overlooked in conversations around skilled work is that there's a lot of support jobs around whatever that key skilled job is as well. Like, I used to do recruiting for manufacturing. I hired a lot of marketing, sales, HR, compliance, safety, a lot of jobs that were not the front line. They were not making the products. They were supporting the people making the products. And I think a lot of people that come from, more of a traditional, you go to college and then you go get a job somewhere fancy sounding. I mean, Lockheed Martin sounds fancy to me, but not in manufacturing, not in something that's considered more industrial and something that's more kind of a mainstream, more white collar job. And I think people that project management and analytics and HR and other kind of traditional white collar backgrounds, those things are also needed. Those are transferable skills into industries like aviation, and they may also be in a position and or to change careers to something more hands-on if they want to do that. But I think that people don't tend to look at these industries to apply their college educated, more white collar skills to, because they don't realize those jobs are there. Does that make sense? What have you seen with that?
Makes
Like,
perfect sense. You're making a huge point that is another change in education and another change in how we view careers. Like few people outside of the aviation industry would think, oh, airlines. I could be in marketing or communications, or I could be an aviation journalist. Basically, we need to say, you're going to college in marketing? Great. Well, think about aviation. And you're not just thinking about, you were talking about other careers. There is, as I said, there's not a discipline or a passion that isn't in the aviation industry, but think about private aviation.
Mm,
You have jet brokers, and you have charter operators, which is basically an airline that goes on demand. You have fixed space operators, which is a private terminal at an airport for private aviation. There's managers for all the FBOs. There's maintenance personnel for all the FBOs. There's ramp personnel for all the FBOs. And I'll tell you, if you start on the ramp, aviation is a career in which you can go great places. If you start on the ramp, you've got a great career ahead of you. And I tell this to rampers all the time because I don't think they appreciate how far they can go and how
mm,
fast they can go up the ranks. And so when you're talking about jobs or think outside of airlines or space companies, think in terms of private aviation. It's a
mm,
highly lucrative career, obviously. It's changing rapidly. There are lots of opportunities. Business aviation is one of those. It also has a critical workforce shortage. And there's lots of information available on careers beyond pilots and flight attendants, maintenance, airport management, FBO management, and all of these are professional accreditations that you will need in order to rise through the ranks. Similarly for airports.
mm. And we haven't even touched yet on the whole new emerging industry of drones and eVTOLs and some of these other things that I know, is a total emerging new technology industry that's about to, I think, explode in a way that people outside of the industry genuinely have no idea about because
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
huge amount of regulations and other things coming into play right now that are about to make, I would say, from what my outside observer sense, are going to really mainstream some of these things, these technologies in a way that most people will be surprised by. And it seems like at the moment the barrier for entry to things, in some of those spaces is even lower because they don't have the same level of complexity as an entire airplane. You might not be carrying people, you might be carrying a package, not that that's, I mean, it is less important, but, not that they're trying to be less safe, but it's just not the same level of complexity in some ways as aircraft. So it seems like as we're getting ready to then staff that industry, as that grows, there will likely be quicker paths to entry there even than traditional aviation. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. First of all, drones is the gateway to aviation. Many kids in school are going for their Part 107 license and are graduating from school and maybe even not graduating from school. In other words, they're still in school and they have a job with a realtor flying drone missions, or they
Right.
have a job with a scientist flying drone missions. So drones is absolutely the gateway to it, and there are many programs that are using drones in their aviation STEM education. So this is fabulous. With advanced air mobility, this is a whole new game. We don't know what we don't know in advanced air mobility, and that is what are the routes going to be like? Are they going to be
Mm,
successful? Is it going to be for the masses? I don't think so. How are we gonna maintain these aircraft? They're gonna be maintenance, at vertiports? Are we gonna create vertiports? There are so many unknowns, and this year is the first year we're starting to unravel that thread to say, "Okay, we're gonna need this, 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 and this." And most of them these are new aircraft, never been on in the transportation system before. They have promises to reconnect communities that have lost air services. They have promises to get you from downtown to wherever you're going more quickly. But beyond that, this is new technology, and you will be at the if you get into advanced air mobility, you will be in the forefront of the evolution of battery technology, of the evolution of the integration of these aircraft into the airspace. That's another mission. That's another mission right there. And you'll be able to look back on a career saying, I was part of that. Just as I'm looking back on my career and saying, I was part of the regional airline industry growth. And these manufacturers are different. They're not, oh, I'm going to make a plane for somebody else to operate. I'm going to make a plane and maybe I'll operate it
Mm,
and I'll hire the pilot. I'll hire the maintenance technicians, and in fact, Beta Technologies, and I think others are doing the same thing, are training, giving you pilot training for free as part of your
wow.
benefits, because they want people who, again, a super employee. They
For
want
their
people who
employees.
build the aircraft to know how to fly it, how to know how it operates in flight. So
Interesting.
these are completely different organizations. They're also made with younger people, established by younger people who are saying, we get the work life balance. We get this. We get that. We get the things that the millennials and Gen Z and Alpha all want. So, they're more open minded to say, how do we pivot here? How do we make sure that we not only have great employees, but we have happy employees?
Absolutely. I know we're well into our time. This has gone so quickly, and there were quite a few more things that we wanted to touch on. I think maybe just as a closing thought, because I know it's something that's very important to you, I would love to hear if you were speaking specifically to women that were interested in aviation. What do you think has positively changed or evolved in terms of women in aviation from, where we've been to where we are now? And, why do you think that a woman or the parents of a young woman sitting there should really seriously consider aviation? Because you would know this better than me, but I believe last I heard it's less than 3% of women in aviation,
Well,
or
less
at
than
least on the
3%.
maintenance side.
Yeah, on the maintenance side.
Okay.
Less than 7% on the pilot side. But
Okay.
there are, first of all, on the positive side, there are thousands of women in executive management in the aviation industry. And some of are CEOs of SpaceX and places like that. I think
A lot of
so
heads of talent I've seen too, CHROs
yeah,
and chief people officers.
yeah. So but on the negative side is we have a male dominated culture, which we in the industry are trying to change. And I really do believe it can change, because it has to change. Because few people realize the relationship between safety and a male dominated culture or a male
Mm,
dominated psychology. Many people are talking about psychological safety to ensure that employees on the job can contribute without fear of retaliation. So that's a whole nother way the workplace is changing. It's changing too slow, but there are many, many people who are working on. I just heard one last week at Catherine Lesperance at the MRO Canada meeting, where she detailed how much money is lost with a grumpy workforce, or a workforce
interesting.
it wants to leave because they don't like the culture, and it was billions of dollars. Compare that to probably a
Believe that.
10-year-old statistic that showed that maintenance, repair, and overhaul industry leaves $1.4 billion on the table for lack of workforce.
Wow.
So not only are you losing money, you can't grow. So if you want to grow your business, you can't grow. So we're stuck in this employee malaise. So one, we have to change it for psychological safety, because it's about safety. Safety and culture go hand in hand.
Mm,
And two, we have to change it for the bottom line. We're already losing too much because we are failing to address the culture. And this is not unique to aviation. This is corporate America governing
right.
policy.
Yeah.
And you see it swing back and forth with the political winds. And we need to have a guidepost that says, a moral compass that says, we want you here, we need you here, and how can we make partnership, employer employee, successful for both of us? And we had been doing that with diversity, equity, and inclusion, but then that went with the political winds. But those of us like me who are very frank about that, saying, okay, you want to shoot the country in the foot, then have that policy. If you want to shoot
Mm,
your company in the foot, then don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion. And don't have psychological safety. The other thing I would say to women and any other minority is that this is the same culture. So we need to band together, not just as women or Latinos or Blacks or whomever. We are a force multiplier for solving the workforce problems. And we need to gather together and say, this culture will not fly. We
mm.
need, because it's not safe, number one, and we are all about safety. And two, we need to have some skin in this game where we are contributing and being rewarded for our contribution. So, and that's the same there, since it's the same culture, I think that's why we all need to get together as one voice of
Mm.
non-traditional employees in the workplace.
That makes sense. I know even speaking with veterans, just because that's been the space I've been working in the last few years, I've heard from many veterans across skilled environments that had tremendous amount of experience that were told, "Oh, your military experience doesn't matter for anything." Like, not worth
Well,
anything, doesn't count. You don't have the one certificate we look for, and we're not willing to help you get it. Bye. Not even interested, not even having a conversation. I talked to one guy who'd had 20 plus years in supply chain, moving billions of dollars worth of equipment all over the world. And he couldn't get an interview or got turned down in an early stage interview for a logistics company because he didn't have any food experience. And I was like, are you
but
serious?
what's wrong with that picture? That had nothing to do with how good or bad this guy was on the job. That had
Nothing.
everything to do with narrow mindset of who they need on the job. They don't
Exactly.
need somebody with food experience. They need somebody who knows how to ship from A to B.
Yep.
The civilian workforce does not understand how transferable these skills are and how important these skills are, and thankfully, there are a lot of veterans organizations working to bridge that gap. DoD has the Skill Bridge programs, which you're aware of. And I would say to any transitioning veteran, get in with your local veterans association. Again, networking with your local veterans group. Get in with the career people in your county, and because they all have veterans programs, they're already targeting veterans. Get in with the Rotary or whatever club it happens to be in town, whatever social service organization, because all this is all networking 101. So
Absolutely agree.
yeah, so um I would say to any veteran who encounters that mentality, has been saved from going to an idiot, working for an
Mm,
idiot.
that's a great point.
Because
That's a great point.
yeah, because you just want food. I'm sorry, I don't have food, but I have shipped billions of dollars in ammunition around the world.
Right.
We have
Yeah,
again, I
it
think
is silly.
one of the problems is changing our corporate mindset on what needs to be done in order to tap the workforce that's already out there.
Absolutely. And thankfully, I mean, I've been, looking at a lot of job descriptions and things recently. And even on the corporate side, especially in the startup world, I feel like more and more and more we're starting to see the shift away. I mean, number of job descriptions that I've looked at recently that didn't even list a degree preference
Right,
or that
right.
had degree or
For
relevant
sure.
experience, degree
Yeah.
preferred or degree required or a degree or, experience,
Relevant
um,
experience. Yeah.
irrelevant experience, things like that. And so that's been a really great, I think, tide to see turning as well. Cause they've done surveys. One came out on LinkedIn a few months ago that basically said, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something silly. I'm going to, make up the exact stats because I don't remember. It was something along these lines of like 75% of CEOs agree that like the majority of jobs at their company don't require a bachelor's degree, then
Right.
85%
I've
of
seen
job
those
descriptions
stats.
on LinkedIn 85% of job descriptions on LinkedIn require a bachelor's degree. So it's like even the CEO acknowledges it's not needed, but the job descriptions still say that it is, which we know statistically deters that non-traditional talent from being involved. So that's a little outside note, but I think, we're starting to see some of those narrow perspectives change in a number of different areas. And it
Yes.
makes me really excited for, where the workforce is going and opportunities for non-traditional talent.
It's
Kathryn,
all
thank you
those
so
young
much. Yeah,
entrepreneurs.
finishing thought.
Yeah, it's all those young entrepreneurs. They're open to change, and it's the big behemoths that need to understand they have to change. They need to be more open to change. But they're too busy putting a butt in a seat and poaching from each other rather than creating a pipeline and changing the culture. But this has been a great conversation. I think people will get a lot out of it. Your
I
points have been
absolutely agree.
wonderful.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I think one last thing that came to mind just off of what you were saying, and I think sums up our conversation well. I looked a little while ago at some of the statistics around how many people actually have college degrees because we started this conversation talking about college for all push, right?
Right,
And we're told
right.
that all of the value, all of the jobs, everything comes on the college side, but last I saw, less than 30% of the population have college degrees. And it's when you go like break it down demographically and you get into the Black community, the Latino community, some of these other communities, it's well below 25%. And some cases like 15 to 20%. And in veterans, I think it's about 25% because you've got all officers obviously have degrees, but the enlisted side is starting to get more degrees while they're in as well, but still, it's low. So you've got 85% of the job postings requiring something that only 30% of the population has. And so it's no wonder
There's a
that
disconnect.
we have a pipeline problem.
Yeah,
And so I really
absolutely.
appreciate people like you, educating, putting this information out there, trying to help people understand and have more options to build meaningful careers. I think it's really important. So thank you for your time and the work that you're
Yes.
doing.
Thank you very much. It's a passion project, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.